I've been with my fiancée, Alex, for over 3 wonderful years. We built a life together based on trust, respect, and a shared vision for the future. However, before Alex, I was in a long-term relationship with someone I'll call Mark. Mark and I were together for 2 years, and while there were good times, his controlling behavior and dismissiveness ultimately drove me away. I left that relationship for my own well-being, and I truly believed I had closed that chapter for good. As Alex and I planned our wedding, a celebration meant to honor our love and our new life, I poured my heart and soul into making sure every detail was perfect. I carefully curated the guest list, inviting only those who truly mattered and who I trusted to support our union. Naturally, I assumed that Mark was no longer a part of my life, and thus, not on the guest list. But a few weeks before the wedding, I received an odd text from an unknown number. At first, I didn't think much of it until I realized it was from Mark. He mentioned that he'd somehow gotten an invitation to my wedding. I was instantly confused and horrified. I double-checked with Alex and our coordinator. Neither of us had any idea how Mark could have received an invite. Apparently, due to some kind of administrative error, or maybe a deliberate act on his part, his name was still on the list. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was a mistake and that I could handle it. After all, I wasn't expecting him, and surely if it was a genuine error, someone would catch it. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The day of the wedding. Everything was going beautifully. The venue was stunning. Our friends and family were all buzzing with excitement, and Alex and I were both glowing with happiness. That is, until I spotted him. There, near the entrance, stood Mark. I felt as if the air had been sucked out of the room. My heart sank, and my hands began to tremble. I had spent months preparing for this day, and now my past was crashing into my present in the most unwanted way possible. I immediately pulled aside one of the event coordinators to confirm if there had been some kind of mix-up. The coordinator sheepishly admitted that due to a clerical error, Mark's name had indeed been included on the guest list. I felt betrayed, not just by the error, but by the audacity of Mark showing up uninvited. The confrontation. I knew I couldn't let this slide, so I mustered every ounce of courage I had and approached him. I tried to keep my voice calm, though inside I was anything but. "Mark," I said firmly, "you need to leave. This is not the place for you." Mark gave me a condescending smile and said, "I just thought I'd see if you're really as happy as you claim to be." His tone was dismissive and smug, as if my pain were nothing more than an inconvenience to him. I felt my anger boil over. How could he trivialize the significance of this day? I explained to him that his presence wasn't just a mistake, it was a violation of the space I had carefully curated for my future with Alex. I told him that my past is just that, my past, and his presence here was disruptive and hurtful. I made it clear that I wasn't interested in any half-hearted explanations or platitudes. I needed him to understand that he had no place here. Mark tried to argue that the invitation was valid, citing the technicality of it being sent. I cut him off, saying, "It doesn't matter how it got here. You're not welcome. I've moved on, and I refuse to have my special day marred by old ghosts." The conversation quickly escalated. His tone shifted from dismissive to defensive, and it was evident that he wasn't willing to back down. Realizing that this confrontation was beginning to create a scene and that I couldn't allow my wedding day to turn into a public brawl, I reluctantly called for security. I felt a mix of relief and heartbreak as they escorted him out of the venue. I could see the shock and whispered murmurs ripple through our guests. Some looked at me with supportive eyes, while others seemed taken aback by the drama unfolding. Aftermath and reflection. The rest of the day was a bittersweet blur. On one hand, our wedding was everything Alex and I had dreamed of. a celebration of love and new beginnings. On the other, the sting of that confrontation lingered with every smile and every toast. I keep replaying the moment in my head, wondering if I could have handled it differently. A part of me wonders if I should have given him a chance to explain, even if just a little. But then I remember all the reasons I left him in the first place. His behavior was toxic, and I have no desire to reopen that painful chapter. Alex was incredibly supportive throughout, wrapping me in comfort and assuring me that I did nothing wrong. But now, I'm stuck with mixed emotions. Some friends have reached out to say I was absolutely right to do what I did, while others are questioning if I might be overreacting. I'm left to ponder whether I let past wounds dictate my actions on what should have been one of the happiest days of my life. So Reddit, I'm asking AITA for kicking my ex out of my wedding. I'm torn between feeling justified for protecting my space and wondering if I could have handled the situation with more grace. Was I too harsh? Or was it the only way to ensure that my wedding remained a celebration of my future and not a reminder of my past? TLDR. My ex, Mark, showed up uninvited at my wedding due to an invitation error. I confronted him and had him escorted out, which created a scene and left me feeling conflicted. AITA for kicking him out of my wedding. Thanks for reading, and I appreciate any honest feedback you can offer. Story 2. AITA for setting strict boundaries. With my family? I grew up in a small town where everyone knew everyone, and my family was the center of my universe. My parents, 2 sisters, and even extended family gatherings were a staple in my life. I remember my childhood as a time of constant activity. Holiday dinners that lasted for hours, birthday parties with far too many opinions on how things should be done, and the occasional unsolicited advice that felt more like criticism than caring. For the longest time, I tried to accommodate their expectations. I wanted to be the good daughter and the nice sister, so I put on a smile, even when I felt crushed under the weight of their judgments. I loved them dearly, and I wanted to believe that their interference came from a place of care. But as I grew older, I started to see that their actions weren't always about love. They were often about control. It all started in college. I was away from home for the first time, and I felt free. I had new friends, new experiences, and a sense of independence I'd never known before. When I called home, I was met with the usual barrage of questions. When are you coming back? Have you found a real job yet? Who are you dating? It seemed like no matter how much I achieved on my own, I was constantly being compared to the ideal image they had of me. I tried to explain that I needed space, that I needed to make my own decisions, but the responses were predictable: guilt, disappointment, and worst of all, a feeling that I was somehow letting them down. Fast forward a few years, college, graduation, my first real job, and I was finally starting to build the life I wanted. I moved to a city, started dating, and even got engaged to a wonderful man who respects my opinions and supports my dreams. But as my personal life began to flourish, the old patterns with my family only intensified. It felt like the more successful I became, the louder their criticisms grew. The breaking point: I'll never forget the night that pushed me over the edge. It was a chilly Saturday evening, and I had come home after a long day at work. I was excited to relax, maybe watch some TV and have a quiet dinner. As I walked into the living room, I heard my mom's voice coming from the kitchen. I hesitated, knowing that her helpful comments were likely in store. "What are you cooking?" she asked as I entered, peering over my shoulder. "You know, if you'd cooked properly, we wouldn't have to order takeout every night. I can't believe you've let yourself go so much." Her words stung, and my stomach churned with a mix of anger and sadness. I had spent the day juggling a heavy workload and then coming home to this barrage of criticism. I tried to brush it off initially, thinking I could let it slide. But that night, it all felt different, like a dam had burst. I sat down at the kitchen table, tears welling up as I listened to my mom continue. You know, your father used to make these amazing dinners, and you could learn a thing or two from him. But I guess you're too busy with your life to care. That was the moment I realized that I needed to set boundaries. I needed to reclaim my sense of self, and I couldn't do that if I allowed myself to be constantly undermined by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. Setting the boundaries. The next day, I woke up with a heavy heart and a clear mind. I knew I couldn't continue the way things were. Over the next few weeks, I started drafting a list of boundaries I wanted to set with my family. It wasn't easy. Each boundary felt like a rejection of the person I'd been taught to be. I struggled with guilt, wondering if I was being selfish or ungrateful. But I also felt a deep, undeniable need to protect my mental and emotional well-being. Here's what I decided. No unsolicited advice. I would kindly but firmly tell them that I appreciated their concern, but that I was capable of making my own decisions. No prying questions about my personal life. If they asked about my relationships, my job, or my future plans, I would answer briefly and change the subject. Respect for my time. I would no longer answer calls or texts late at night unless it was an emergency. Privacy about my home. I informed them that my home was a sanctuary for me and that I would prefer to host family gatherings on my terms and schedule, limiting physical visits. I'd now ask for more notice before visits and would politely decline impromptu drop-ins. I remember the day I sat down with my mom and told her about these boundaries. I was trembling as I spoke, afraid of her reaction, yet determined to stand my ground. "Mom, I need to talk to you," I began, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been feeling overwhelmed and disrespected by some of the things that have been happening. I love you and everyone in this family, but I need you to respect my space and my choices. I can't keep having my decisions questioned or my efforts dismissed. I need you to stop giving unsolicited advice and asking invasive questions about my life." Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment there was silence, an unbearable pause where I waited for her to speak. When she finally did, it was in a soft, pained tone. "I just worry about you. I only want what's best for you." I understood that, but I also knew that her way of showing concern was damaging. "I know you care," I replied, "but your way of showing it makes me feel small and incapable. I need you to trust that I can take care of myself. I'm asking for some space to grow, and that means respecting my boundaries." I expected anger, or at least some form of protest. But instead, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I guess I never thought about it that way," she admitted. "I'm sorry if I've made you feel that way." For a brief moment, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change. But as the days turned into weeks, I noticed that while my mom said she would try, the old habits were hard to break. My phone would still light up with messages filled with advice I hadn't asked for. My sisters continued to comment on my relationship choices during family video calls. And every time I tried to gently remind them of my boundaries, I was met with groans or dismissive remarks. The fallout. The real fallout came during our annual family reunion, a massive event that my parents had been planning for months. I had been clear that I didn't want the same old dynamics at the reunion, but I didn't expect it to be such a battleground. From the moment I arrived, it felt like I was walking into a pressure cooker. My cousins were hugging me, asking about my job, my engagement, my future. Each question laced with the expectation that I should have everything figured out. I tried to keep my responses brief, but it was exhausting. The more I tried to enforce my boundaries, the more I felt like I was on trial. During dinner, things came to a head. My sister, Lisa, who has always been the family's self-appointed life coach, leaned across the table and said, So, have you thought any more about settling down? Maybe it's time to stop being so picky. I felt my blood boil. I had been working so hard to build a life on my own terms, and here she was, reducing me to a checklist of milestones. Lisa, I'm really happy with my life right now, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I appreciate your concern, but I don't need your judgment or your advice on this matter. She rolled her eyes and smirked. Well, you never listen to us, do you? We're just trying to help. The conversation quickly escalated into an argument, with relatives chiming in on both sides. I tried to steer the discussion away, but it spiraled out of control. Before I knew it, the entire table was divided, some supporting my right to live as I please, and others insisting that I was being ungrateful for my family's care. The climax of the evening came when my father, who has always been a quiet but influential figure in our family, said, "We raised you better than this. We raised you to value family and to listen to your elders." His words, intended as a reprimand, felt like a final blow. I couldn't hold back the tears as I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "But I'm tired of being controlled by the people who are supposed to love me. I'm not the little girl you once knew. I'm trying to build a life for myself, and your constant interference is making that impossible." With that, I stormed out of the dining room, leaving behind a table full of shocked and silent faces. After the reunion, in the days that followed, the fallout was palpable. Text messages from relatives poured in, some expressing concern for me, others condemning my behavior. My mother called me repeatedly, apologizing and begging me to come home for a family meeting. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, I craved the comfort of family. On the other, I needed space to breathe. I spent many sleepless nights agonizing over whether I'd gone too far. I revisited every conversation, every word exchanged, and questioned if there was another way to handle things. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been living in a toxic cycle for far too long. My boundaries weren't an attack on my family. They were a necessity for my mental health. I reached out to a few close friends and even a therapist. In therapy, I learned that setting boundaries is not only healthy, but essential, especially when dealing with controlling or overbearing family members. I began to understand that my feelings were valid and that I deserved to be treated with respect, even by those I love most. One of the most surprising outcomes was how some family members slowly began to respect my wishes. My younger cousin, who had always been a bit of a free spirit, texted me a few days after the reunion saying, "I'm really sorry if I ever made you feel bad. I see now that you're just trying to take care of yourself." It was a small gesture, but it meant a lot. It made me realize that maybe change was possible, even if it was slow and painful. The long road to healing. It's been 6 months since the reunion. And while the wounds haven't completely healed, there's been a noticeable shift. I still enforce my boundaries, sometimes to the chagrin of my family, but I'm learning to be firm without being confrontational. I've also found new ways to connect with them on my own terms. For instance, I set up a weekly group call where we talk about our lives. No unsolicited advice allowed, just genuine updates and support. It's not perfect, and there are still moments of tension, but it's a start. My mom, for her part, has been trying to understand my perspective. She started asking if I need help with things before jumping in, and while she occasionally slips back into old habits, I remind her gently, "Mom, please just let me figure it out." I know it's hard for her, after all, it's all she's known, but I need her to trust me. There have been setbacks, too. Last month, during a family vacation, an argument erupted over something trivial. A misplaced towel at the hotel, of all things. I tried to let it go, but it escalated quickly, with voices raised and old resentments bubbling to the surface. I eventually walked away and spent a few quiet hours alone, collecting my thoughts. When I rejoined the group, I was calmer, and I explained that I needed some space to cool down. It was a humbling reminder that setting boundaries is an ongoing process, not a one-time fix. I've also started documenting my feelings, journaling about the ups and downs, the moments of triumph when I stand up for myself, and the times I falter. Writing it all down has been therapeutic, and it's helped me see the progress I'm making, even if it's not as fast as I'd like. I'm learning that healing isn't linear, and that every setback is just another opportunity to reinforce my commitment to self-care. Reflections and a glimmer of hope now, as I sit here typing this post. I'm still grappling with mixed emotions. Part of me wonders if I've hurt my family beyond repair. I see the pain in their texts and the hesitance in their voices when we talk, and it stings. I never intended to alienate the people I love. But another part of me knows that if I continue to sacrifice my mental health for the sake of familial expectations, I'll lose myself entirely. It's a delicate balance, caring for those who raised you while also honoring your own needs. I've come to realize that I'm not asking for perfection from my family. I'm just asking for respect. I'm asking them to see me as an independent person, capable of making my own decisions, even if those decisions aren't what they would have chosen for me. I've also learned that boundaries can lead to growth. Since setting these limits, I've rediscovered who I am outside of the family dynamic. I've pursued hobbies that I'd long neglected, reconnected with friends who've always supported me, and even started a small side business that brings me joy. The more I invest in myself, the clearer it becomes that my worth isn't defined by how well I fit into someone else's expectations.